Today we're going to do the second part of factoring trinomials, and that is not just doing rooftop, but first having to factor out a greatest common factor. So, when we are factoring, we must always check for a greatest common factor first. In doing so, we will be able to do rooftop, and then it work whenever we multiply back through. So, let's go ahead and get started. If there is a greatest common factor, you're going to factor it out first, and if you don't, it's going to mess you up. Then what you'll do is try to factor the remaining three terms using the rooftop method, which we learned yesterday. So these are your steps. First, is there a GCF of all the terms? It has to be all of them. Second, try to factor the three terms, or the trinomials, using rooftop. So our first goal is to find the greatest common factor of letter A. So remember, we're going to look at each one of them and see if there's any greatest common factor that we can pull out of there. As you look at them, you notice that, they all can be divided by 2. Remember, you have to try to go higher than that. So each one of those actually could be divided by 4. So your greatest common factor on this one is 4. So we're going to go ahead and say 4 times what will give us 4x squared? Well, that will be x squared. 4 times what will give us 24x? That would be positive 6x. 4 times what will give us 32? And that will be 8. So now we've gotten our greatest common factor out of there. Now what we need to do is rooftop what's inside the parentheses. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to rooftop it, and this would be 8x squared right here. And then we're going to, of course, add to the 6x. The 4 isn't gone, it's just kind of hanging out while we do the inside here. So let's go ahead and do our little chart over here. We're going to multiply to 8x squared, and we're going to add to 6x. 1x times 8x, 2x times 4x, this would be 9x, and this would be 6x. So these are the terms that are going to add to, or multiply to 8x squared and add to 6x, and those will be what we replace that middle term with. We're still going to write down the 4, and we'll do x squared plus 2x plus 4x plus 8. Now what we need to do is we need to break this up into 2 parentheses. The problem is we don't want to get that 4 confused with anything, so what we're going to do is we're just going to draw an arrow. We've got to keep it in our answer, but we don't want it to get confused with any of the greatest common factor work that we're doing when we're trying to rooftop. So we're just going to draw it an arrow and write the 4 down first, because if you don't, you will forget about the greatest common factor, and it is part of your answer. So let's go ahead and do parentheses for the first 2 terms and parentheses for the last 2 terms. This part, again, is no different than what we did yesterday. So we're going to pull out an x. That would be x times x plus 2, because x times what will give you x squared? That will be x. X times what will give you 2x? That will be 2. Now we'll look at the other 2 terms. Greatest common factor is not 2. It's actually 4. They can both be divided by 4 evenly. So 4 times what gives you 4x? That would be x. And 4 times what gives you 8? That would be 2. Notice you've got your parentheses that are the exact same, so we're ready to write down our 2 factors. So this would be x plus 4, and then x plus 2 gets written down. So now when we circle our answer, it's not just the 2 parentheses we had yesterday, it includes the 4, which is our greatest common factor. So remember, we're doing the exact same thing we did yesterday, except that at the very, very beginning, we see if there's a greatest common factor of the entire trinomial and get that taken out so that we have a very simple trinomial that we can do the rooftop on. So let's look at letter B. Again, we want to check to see if there's a greatest common factor. And in each one of those, I can divide out a 3. So let's go ahead and divide that out. 3 times what will give me 3a squared? A squared. 3 times what will give me negative 15a? Negative 5a. 3 times what will give me 12? 4. Okay, remember, we're going to go ahead and start the rooftop process. So we're going to do the product to 4a squared, and we're going to do the sum to negative 5a. 1a times 4a and 2a times 2a would be 5a and 4a. So that process we are old hand at because we've been doing that all week long. We notice that there is a 5a, which is very close to what we need. The problem is that we don't have any negatives right now, so we're going to make that negative on each one so that it can add to negative 5. So here are the two factors that we're going to put in place of that middle term. So we've got 3 times a squared minus 1a minus 4a plus 4. All right, remember it's time to break up our polynomial here into 2 sets of parentheses, but we don't want this 3 to get in the way. So we're going to go ahead and bring it down to the answer, and then we'll go ahead and break up our parentheses. So we've got a squared minus 1a plus negative 4a plus 4. Now we'll pull out the a squared minus a. We'll pull out an a because they both have an a there. So this would be a times what will give me a squared. That would be an a. A times what will give me negative 1a. That would be negative 1. Remember over here this is a negative, so we're going to put a negative in front. And if you look at them, yes, they both could be divided by 2, but we need to go greater. They also could be divided by 4. Negative 4 times what will give you negative 4a. And negative 4 times what will give you negative 4. That would be a negative 1. Notice that the parentheses are exactly the same, and then we'll write down our factors. We'll put our greatest common factors first, a minus 4. Then we'll do a minus 1. Remember, we're getting this a and this negative 4 here, and then because those two are the exact same, they come down to be our third factor there. And I've already written my greatest common factor, so it's already there. Okay, then we have our two factors like what we did yesterday. So our whole answer is 3 times a minus 4 times a minus 1. The only thing new today is that we're pulling out a greatest common factor to begin with. All right, letter C. Again, we're going to look to see if they have anything in common. All of them can be divided by 2, so the greatest common factor includes a 2. But look, they also all have an r. So the greatest common factor on this one is 2r. So we're going to put a 2r in front here, and we'll say 2r times what will give me 2r to the third power. That would be r squared. Then 2r times what will give me negative 4r squared. You should be saying negative 2r. 2r times what is negative 6r? Negative 3. Okay, now it's time to rooftop what's inside. So we're going to go ahead and say that we're going to multiply to negative 3r squared, and we're going to add to that middle term. So we've got 1r times negative 3r, and if we add those, it gives us exactly what we need. So that's what we're going to write inside where that middle term is. So we'll do plus 1r minus 3r minus 3. It's now time to break up our two parentheses. So we're going to go ahead and draw the 2r, which is our greatest common factor, in the answer. And now we can break this up into 2 sets of parentheses. Remember to always put a plus here, and always keep that negative inside the parentheses. All right, now we'll do the greatest common factor of the first parentheses. It's an r. So r times what will give you r squared? That would be an r. R times what will give you 1r? Would be 1. Remember, this is negative, so we'll put a negative in front, and then we see what's the greatest common factor. It would be 3. So, negative 3 times what gives you negative 3r? R. Negative 3 times what will give you negative 3? Plus 1. So you notice again that the parentheses are exactly the same. So in your answer, along with the greatest common factor, we need to put the r and the negative 3. And we need to put the other one, r plus 1. So that would be your entire answer. Don't forget about that greatest common factor. Okay? We're not going to do letter D right now. We're going to do letter E. Again, we're going to look to see if there's a greatest common factor. As I'm looking at it, if I try dividing everything by a 2, that wouldn't work. So that means that there is no GCF on this one. So this one ends up looking exactly like what we did yesterday, where we would rooftop to begin with, and so we would have a product of negative 42x squared and 11x. And so you would do your 1x times negative 42x, 2x times negative 21x, 3x times negative 14x, and then 6x times negative 7x. And then we're going to go ahead and add. So we've got negative, we've got negative 41x, negative 19x, negative 11x, and negative 1x. Well, here's one that's close, so we're going to go ahead and reverse the sign. So this would be negative 3x times 14x. And so these would be your two numbers that we're going to put in the middle there. So this would be 2x squared minus 3x plus 14x minus 21. Now is the time to group them. So this one is exactly like what we did yesterday. So we'll look at these first two terms and we'll pull out the greatest common factor of x. X times what gives me 2x squared? 2x. X times what gives me negative 3x? Negative 3. Then in these two I could divide out a 7. 7 times what gives me 14x? 2x. 7 times what gives me negative 21? Be negative 3. And notice you've got the parentheses the same. So this is x plus 7 and 2x minus 3. And remember, you can always check all of these by just simply multiplying it back through. Now when you've got a greatest common factor, you're going to multiply through this one first, then you'll distribute the 2r. So let me show you how to do that. So we're going to do this one and we're going to check it. So we would start out by foiling this one or doing your double distributive property. So this would be r squared plus r, negative 3r, and negative 3. And you still have that 2r in the front. We can go ahead and combine these. So that's r squared minus 2r minus 3. And then because this 2r is in front here, we're going to distribute that. So 2r to the third minus 4r squared minus 6r gets us back to the original problem that we had there. So that checks out. All right, next one, letter F. First, we're going to go ahead and look for a greatest common factor. And here, the greatest common factor would be a 4. Could be a 2, but that wouldn't be the greatest. We'd have to go farther and see if there's a 4. So, and then you could go even farther to see if there was an 8, but 4 can't be divided by 8 evenly. That would end up being a fraction. So we're going to go ahead and divide out that 4. This would be 7m squared. 4m times what gives you 4m? That would be plus m. 4m times what gives you 8? That would be plus 2. So now we're going to do our rooftop with that. Product would be 14m squared, and our sum would be 1m. And so as we're looking at this, this would be 1m times 14m and 2m times 7m. When we add them, we get 15 and 14, and neither of those give you 1. And you can't even put any negatives on here to make that happen. So at this point, we have to stop. But normally, like yesterday, we would call this prime. This is not prime. True, we couldn't go any farther, but because we were able to pull out that 4, that is a factor. And so it's not prime, because prime, you can't pull out anything. You can't factor it with rooftop. You can't bring a greatest common factor out. So prime is only when it won't do anything. You can't pull a greatest common factor out. You can't factor it using rooftop. But because this one was able to pull a greatest common factor out, this is your final answer, because these two things will multiply to give you letter F. All right, look at letter G. It says the area of a rectangular sign is 7x squared minus 20x minus 3. The width of the sign is 7x plus 1. Find the length. On this one, it's asking us to do the same thing we did at the top. It's giving us an area, just like we've done the past 2 days. It's giving us an area, and it's wanting to know about the width and the length, okay? Each one of these could be a width and a length right here. A minus 4 and A minus 1. These could be a length and a width, and that could be the product. This could be a length and a width, and that could be the product, all right? So what we're trying to do is we're going to factor this using rooftop, but notice how they already gave you a width. That's kind of extra information for now. What we're going to do is we're going to factor using rooftop, and then we'll see how that 7x plus 1 plays into it. So we're going to go ahead and factor using rooftop, because if you look at it, there's no greatest common factor to begin with. Remember, we will always want to check that from now on. We want to check to see if there's a greatest common factor. So now, as we do rooftop, this would be negative 21x squared. And so we're going to multiply to negative 21x squared and add to negative 20x. So we have 1x times negative 21x, 3x times negative 7x. This would give you negative 20x. Wow. Negative 20x, and then negative 4x. Now you'll notice you've got your answer right there. So we're going to use these two numbers in that middle term. So you have 7x squared plus 1x minus 21x minus 3. Now we can group them just like we've been doing. 7x squared plus 1x plus negative 21x minus 3. As we look at those first two, we see that there is a greatest common factor of an x. X times what will give you 7x squared? It would be 7x. X times what will give you 1x? That would be 1. Because this is a negative 21, we've got a negative in the front, and those both could be divided by a 3. So negative 3 times what will give you negative 21x? That would be 7x. Negative 3 times what will give you negative 3? It's a plus 1. So now we're going to bring down our two factors here, the greatest common factors, to be 1, and then we've got 7x plus 1 as the other one. Now let's go ahead and look at what the problem was talking about. It gave us the area, and it told us that the width was 7x plus 1. Right here then, this is the width. It was only asking us to find the length. So this would be our length and what we would call the answer. Now if you got to the end of this and you wrote down x minus 3 times 7x plus 1 and you circled that, that's okay. Because in a word problem like on a multiple choice test or something, you would see that whenever you got to your answer, it's not both of them, it would only be one of them, and you would just have to make sure that you're choosing the right one in the answer choice. Okay? Now for your assignment, you're going to do all of them. There are 8 problems. and it says factor completely, which means that you are going to first find out if there's a greatest common factor. And if there is or if there isn't, then you want to go ahead and try to do the rooftop on a trinomial, okay? If the polynomial will not factor at all, then you will write prime. Now, one thing you're going to need to do is, there's a typo on this one. Number 1, this minus 84 needs to change to plus 84, okay? The minus right here changes to a plus. Now remember, on Monday, you're going to take a quiz. And that quiz, if you remember writing it from the board here just a few minutes ago, the quiz on Monday will just be over monomials and factoring, and then factoring using the distributive property. So none of this rooftop will be on there. On Tuesday, you're going to do the quiz where it is going to have the rooftop on there and factoring out a greatest common factor. Okay, so but for Monday, the only thing you're going to do is remember how to do the greatest common factor and do the factor trees and then factor out the greatest common factor. That's Monday's quiz. We were going to take it today, but my daughter is sick and I had to stay home with her, so we're pushing the quiz number 11-1 off till Monday. And then, of course, remember we have our test over all of this on Thursday. The review is on Blackboard, so if you want to go ahead and get a head start this weekend, you're more than welcome to. Just understand that there are a couple of problems on there that we haven't done. The lesson for, we'll do that on Monday. Good luck with your lesson today and have a good weekend. Make sure that you work until the bell rings.